So let's take a moment to explore some of the other facets here on the basics panel. So one way to you can look at a lot of different properties and their effects on your surface is to look at the presets. If you go to Windows and open up the presets window, you'll get a lot of pre-built uh, surface options that you can explore. So for example, if you go to nature, you have everything from bumpy mud to grass to dry ground to dirty sand, things that are very different from what we've been seeing here with just these solid colors. Then you look at rocks and you can see how some of these bump map surfaces really can create and emulate nature. So you see like the different types of rock formations, for example, that are possible with bump mapping. And as you explore some of these, you'll see a lot of the different options that are available that may sort of open your eyes as to what can be done beyond just the solid colors like you have here on this palette, where it's just smooth and simple. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to load up some of these rather different ones, and let's go, instead of organic, let's maybe just go with nature. Let's try, for example, the dry lake, and we'll load that up. So to load up any of these surfaces, you just double click on it. Of course, it's going to load into the channel that you have selected. So I have the snow selected right now. So I'll just demonstrate this. Let's try the dry ground and say yes. And there you have it. And you can see the color is there. You don't really notice so much the bump mapping, but let me show you what's installed here. First off, you'll notice that it's employed special parameters for all of these settings. So the diffuse value is lowered to 90. It has some specularity, some glossiness, no reflection, etc. But the real difference is that these T buttons you see over here have been lit up. So you notice there's 4 of them, one on the bump map, and then one for specularity, diffuse, and color. They all perform a different role. But if you look at the texture map assigned to the bump, basically you'll find what's creating that illusion of the cracks, of the pits. And so they've chosen to go the procedural texture, and they've gone with one called veins. Now, on top of that, there's also another layer called crumple. Okay, so these two together are creating a bump map. And all of these coordinates, we haven't looked or explored and how to do this yet, and now is probably not the best time, but the scale of these maps, the implementation in terms of the axis and the amount and all that is all adjustable and all variable. To explore some of the others, you can just double click and load them up and see the effects on that. And you can see that this really doesn't look anything like this. This is a much different appearance. It looks like we're zoomed out almost, and it's not nearly as effective as when we see it on this scale. So there may be times when you have to go ahead and make adjustments to the different parameters to get that to look as it should on your particular object. So I'm going to try and explore some of these a little bit and see if I can get the parameters to really... So I'm dropping down the scale and going down in size on the X to see what effect that will have, to see if I can get something closer to what I'm looking for. And if I'm not able to see any difference, then I can try going the other direction with my mouse and seeing if going up in value will have an impact. And hopefully you'll start to see some change on this as you go higher or lower, and that should give you an indication as to which way you should go. As I go higher in number, I'm starting to get more of the crumple effect that I'm seeing when I look at the preview. So let's go ahead and keep going with that. You can see the more I dial this in, the more that starts to show up. Now look at it. You notice that these grains of sand that look so tight and thin now, they're really starting to turn into something else the larger I get. So a lot of this, because it is an organic process, really involves some exploration on your part, because you have to understand the relationship of scale with these objects and these elements is going to be different for each object based upon its scale. So depending upon the look you're going, you may have to explore, and that's what these sliders are good for. And if you think you find a pretty good number in there, then you can go even across the board and see how that looks and see if that makes it look a little more symmetrical. Let me try, for example, 30 meters on each of these channels and see how that looks. Looks pretty good. You can see now it's more focused, it's more proportional because I've gone with even numbers here. It doesn't, you don't see some angles getting soft or washed out. You get that cauliflower kind of look with this crumple. And you notice that I just did that off the top of my head. I did not know, what the scale would be. I'm just exploring, and that's kind of what you need to do with these pre-built textures, because they're not going to automatically scale properly for your object. You need to find the best combination for your particular object. And they will vary quite a bit as you go through and explore. They're not all going to have the same effect on each object. And sometimes, that's a good thing. You really get some interesting results just by trial and error in things like this viney ridges, which kind of gives this snow a more interesting look, actually. It doesn't look like this, it doesn't look like that, but that's a good thing, I think, for this particular object, and that's what I'm talking about, is that sometimes what you're looking for isn't always what you see when you first click on it. But I think exploring this by loading these up and seeing the effect on these tabs can definitely help you understand what it is that's happening with surfacing as you want to get deeper and deeper into it. Okay, we'll explore texture mapping a little bit later, but just for now, understand that it's basically a way that Lightwave can apply gradients, bitmapped images, procedural textures, which are similar to bitmaps but are built into Lightwave in more mathematical. Basically, they can apply these to individual channels, so each specific element can have its own map, and that's how you generate a lot of interesting and complex looks. Before we go and explore some of those texture map procedures with another model, let's go and finish up exploring this surface editor. So now that you know how to load up your own presets and your own basics, let's go ahead and come back to some of the things that we kind of glossed over, like translucency. So translucency, again, is an effect that is not achievable without a collection of things involved. So I'm going to need another object to show you what translucency can really look like. So I'm going to go back to Modeler, and let's just make something real simple on a new layer. I'm going to put these elements in the background so I can see what I'm doing. On this new layer, I'm going to make kind of like a sheet, a little block here. Let me zoom out a little bit, and let me go to the box tool, and I'm just going to kind of, again, make like a big wall here, or a sheet, or whatever you want to say, and then move that. Oops, undo. How am I getting? So I'm getting the head involved in this, and oh, accidentally. There we go. If you accidentally click on the foreground layer, that's what'll happen. Let me go back and readjust my layers here. There we go. That should do it. Okay, well, I need to undo the creation of that, and now I'm ready to go. Okay, let me try that again. So I'm going to make a box, and we'll make a wall here, and I'm going to hit the T key to move it so that it's out to one side of my object. And in this case, why don't I go ahead and put it in front of his face so it's easier to find. I'm going to rotate this. and move it like so. Alright. I think that's more or less in position. Alright, now remember, we need to make this double-sided as well. So let's give it a surface. I'm going to go to the Change Surface tool. We'll call this Sheet. And I'm going to make it double-sided. There it is. Now it's visible in perspective view as well. Perfect. Alright, I'm going to hit the S key to save that, and it should update automatically, so when I switch back over to layout, it should automatically appear, and there it is. Alright, let's give this new surface, this sheet surface, let's give it a 100% translucent effect. And now I want to go ahead and light it differently. So I'm going to take the distant light over on this side of things, because remember, in VPR mode you really can't see anything. Right now you notice the light is pointing towards the sheet. I want to go the opposite direction. I want to point it this way. There we go. So that it's coming from behind the snowman, and you can see there now the setup. You see how the light is coming from behind the snowman, hitting his back actually, and pointing towards the sheet. And look at the result that you get with that. You see that you're able to get the shadow of the snowman projected onto the sheet because the light is coming from this. And it's all, you know, if you were hanging clothes outdoors and the sun was setting over here, and this person is, you know, hanging the laundry whatsoever, and you're on the other side of that sheet, you would see, of course, the shadow of that person being projected. And that's the effect of really of translucency. That's what we're getting there. So that's kind of a long way to go just to explain translucency, but it really doesn't work any other way. So there we go. Transparency, I do want to come back to as well, so let me do this. I'm going to, now that we're done with translucency, I'm going to go ahead and eliminate this. Well, actually, instead of eliminating it, let me just change the color. How about that? I'm going to change it to bright orange, and I'm going to take off its translucent effect. And what I will do is move it. So I'm going to take this element and just hit the T key to move it and put it, whoops. Thought I had the sheet selected. I did not. Here we go. Let's try that again. Move it behind there, and let's find my light. So I'm going to light from the front, spin it back around the way it was. There we go. Great. All right, let's demonstrate a couple other things related to surfacing. I'm going to move back closer to our snowman. Okay, so with transparency, remember we can create the glass effect. Whoops, I want this on the snow. So select snow and let's increase the transparency. There we go. All right, now I'm seeing through, and we have this kind of glass-like effect. Refraction index will give me a thicker, more distorted look through the lens of this glass. Right now it's set to 1. Let's change this to like a 6. And what happens is you get these inner shadows that give the illusion that the glass is actually thicker than it is. Oops, I chose 60. There we go. And so what does that do? Well, it creates the difference between a thin layer of glass like this, like maybe an ornament, to something more substantial, like maybe something that has weight to it, like a really thick glass. And that way you're able to get different looks with it. But that's what refraction index it works hand in hand with transparency to create a thicker illusion to the transparency. And of course, we're gonna usually apply that to a double-sided object, but here we go. Let's try reflection once again. I'm going to take transparency back to 0. You notice now refraction index becomes disabled because it's no longer applicable. Let's take reflection up to about 80. And you notice now it's reflecting this orange surface behind it. And as I spin around behind it, you can see it's acting like a mirror and it's reflecting the other elements in the scene. So if I were to take this and pull it away, you see how that has an impact on the body, because the reflection is reflecting its environment. It's reflecting what's around the snowman and updating that. So that about covers the Basics tab. With the exception of envelopes and texture maps, we pretty much covered everything there that's relatable. So hopefully you've got a good understanding now of what these parameters do and how they can be adjusted. Let's now do a couple more things before we wrap up this look at basic surface elements. On the Advanced tab, I know this is a basics lesson, but the Advanced tab has a couple things that may be of interest to you, in that there are things you can add to your basic surfaces in the form of special effects. Say, for example, the glow. You can have a glow element to it that gives it a little bit more radiance. The Environment tab is really critical in the sense that it will give you the option of reflecting the actual environment or a fake spherical map. Why do that? Well, when you think about it, if you're rendering a movie at 30 frames per second, that's a lot of calculating going on, a lot of Lightwave looking at the world that's surrounding the snowman and trying to build that reflection into its surface, which can take a lot of time to render. So if your renders are too slow, you can speed them up by changing to spherical map. And what that does is it lets you load up an image of your choosing, a JPEG or a Photoshop file, and it will reflect only what's that represented in that image. Now, that may seem like a lot of trouble, but it actually can save you time on your renders. It may not look as real, but it is a time-saving feature, so that's why it's there. You can do a spherical map and ray trace, or you can just do ray tracing plus the backdrop, which is going to give you the most realism. So refraction is really the same thing, but again, when you're dealing with refractions, you're able to choose the way in which it distorts the environment. So again, that's a time consuming process when you have a transparent element and it has to distort accordingly. That can take a lot of time. So Lightwave can be set up so that it uses a spherical map to save you render time. So these are basically choices between realism versus speed of render. Then you have a tab for specialized shaders, and this is useful for doing special effects for certain types of looks, and we're not going to get into any of these right now, but this is just where you would set up things like cell shading to get like a 2D cartoon look where it has a very different feel than a 3D typical surface would have. So that's just kind of a quick preview of some of the more advanced options that you have at your disposal. We won't get into those right now, but just know that they're there is all. Let's do a quick look at texture maps and then we'll wrap it up there. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to switch gears on my model and load up a different object. So I'll do that right now. I'm going to close the surface editor. I'm going to clear out this scene, and I am going to go load up a new object, load object from my file menu, and inside my classic content directory. If you have one of these loaded up on your computer, you feel free to follow along. If not, then again, you can sort of get the gist of what I'm doing and apply it to your own objects. I'm going to load up the pop can here, and it's just a regular soda can object. What I want to show you though is in the surface editor, I can choose between the different types of surfaces, and here's the label, which is clearly red. And let's go ahead and apply a image to that. So I'm hit the T for texture. And remember I told you there was image map, procedural, texture, and gradients. This is going to be an image map, which is like a photograph. It's kind of like putting a sticker on an object, really. So it's set to planar, but our object is shaped like a cylinder. So instead of using a flat planar projection, I'm going to switch it to cylindrical to represent a cylinder. The next thing I'll do is choose the image, go to image, load image. And under that, I'm going to go back to my Lightwave folder and just dig up some images that can be useful for this. Let's go to maybe a logo of some sort. Let me see what I have available. Well, there's the food one. Maybe I can just find a label for it. There we go. There's the Lightdew logo. Open that up. And so here is what the image looks like. You can see it's just a fake graphic. It's made to look like Mountain Dew, but it says Lightwave on it. And we have a lot of basic options here that we can choose to edit this image. And this can also be a video file, by the way, if you're wondering. But yeah, we can change quite a few things. If you're familiar with image editing software, then you'll notice some of the same options here, and it can even be layered like a Photoshop file. But getting back to the 3D element of this, I've chosen my image, I've chosen cylindrical for the texture process, but now on the axis, I have to choose what kind of axis do I want it to wrap it around. Well, Z, remember, is this. It's the depth. X would be across like this, but my can is vertical. It's up and down, so the y-axis would be the correct choice. You notice it's still stretched and doesn't look right. So I can use my X, Y, and Z scaling and adjust it manually like I did earlier, and you can see there it's already adjusting. But automatic sizing will often work well for texture maps if there's no procedural textures involved. Click automatic sizing, and there you go. That looks pretty good. If you don't believe me, let me zoom in a little bit and let's just spin this thing around and see if it fits. But it looks like it's fitting pretty well. There's my logo and it's wrapped on. So that's a quick look at how to wrap a texture map. And this could be applied to any channel, or you can have multiple, as we saw earlier with the presets. And it's a really effective way to get a photorealistic texture onto your object. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there for surfacing basics. That should be enough to get you started. If you'd like to explore more with surfaces, I'd highly recommend going back to Windows presets and loading up some of the various surfaces that they have there to explore how they created these looks by looking at the channels and the parameters. We'll see you on the next tutorial.